Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we will look at converting between fractions and decimals. But just before we get to that, we need to understand place value. So when you have a decimal written like 0.123, it's important we know the first column is tenths, second hundredths, the next is thousandths, and then it would be 10,000ths and so on. So this number has 1/10, 200ths, and 3,000ths. That will come up in our conversions. So fractions and decimals are just different ways to write the same number. Sometimes it's preferable to use fractions, sometimes it's preferable to use decimals. So we have to be really good at converting between them. So let's first look at converting fractions to decimals. So you find an equivalent fraction whose denominator is a power of 10. So by power of 10, I mean 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, or so on. Or you can use short division. For decimals to fractions, it's actually quite a lot easier. You just use as the numerator the number without a decimal point, and the denominator is the lowest place value. You may need to simplify. All right, let's start with fractions to decimals. So here I have 3/10. Well, its denominator is already a power of 10. What this means is I have 3/10. So all I'm going to do is put 3 in the tenths column. So that number there is 3/10. Similarly for 1300ths. So I'm just going to put 1300ths. Problem is I can't put 13 in the hundredths column, so I just write it like this, 0.13. 1/10 and 300ths is the same as 1300ths. Easy as that. So what about 97/1000? See, the thing is, I want to write this as a decimal, and because there's 1,000 on the bottom, I'm going to go to the thousandths place value here. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to write the 7 and 9, 97, and I need an extra number here. I just write a 0. So that's well and good, because for the first 3, the denominator was all 10. If it's not a power of 10, you need to find one. So for example, 3/5, I'm going to make an equivalent fraction whose denominator is a power of 10. If I times top and bottom by 2, I actually get 6/10. The denominator is a power of 10. So that just means I put a 6 in the tenths column. Easy as. What about 7/20? Well, I can't make 20 into 10, but I can make it into 100. 20 goes into 100 5 times. Now, what you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So 7 times 5 gives me 35. 20 times 5 gives 100. So I just end up with 0.35, 35 hundredths. What about 39/50? Well, 50 goes into 100 twice. If you times the bottom by 2, times the top by 2. So 39/50 gives us 78/100. So we just put 78 hundredths, 0.78. What about 19/25? Well, 25 goes into 100 4 times. What you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So a quick way of multiplying by 4, remember, you double it and double it again. So 19 times 4. Double 19 is 38. Double it again is 76. So here I get 76/100. So I put 76 hundredths, 0.76. So this method will work most of the time, but there are some times where short division will be preferable. So let's look at an example of that. So let's say I want to make 1/8 into a decimal. So the thing is, it can be hard to figure out which power of 10 is divisible by 8. It turns out to be 1,000, but that's not immediately obvious. It's also not obvious without a calculator. What do you times by 8 to get 1,000? So what we can do is use the short division algorithm. Remember, this means divide. This is 1 divided by 8. So what we're saying is, how many times does 8 go into 1? And put a few zeros here. So 8 goes into 1 0 times, remainder 1. And when you're doing this, decimal point must go above decimal point. Now we say, how many times does 8 go into 10? Well, it goes 1 time, remainder 2. How many times does 8 go into 20? Well, it goes 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16, so you have 4 left over. How many times does 8 go into 40? Well, it goes 5 and there is no remainder, so we stop there. So 1 over 8 is 0.125. It turns out that 1 over 8 is 125 over 1,000. So you could have done that using the method from the previous slide, but again, it's not an easy one to do. So sometimes you might like to use short division. All right, let's now look at converting some decimals to fractions. So this is something people tend to find easier. So what you do when you're converting decimals to fractions, you write the number with no decimal point on top. On the bottom goes the lowest place value. So remember, it goes tenths, hundredths. So because hundredths is the last place value, I put 100 on the bottom. This just says 0.02 is 2 hundredths. So this fraction can be simplified because they have a common factor of 2. 2 divided by 2, 100 divided by 2. 0.02 and 1 over 50 are the same number, just written in a different way. So 0.7, we just write the 7 on top, no decimal point, and it's in the tenths column. So it's just 7 over 10, and that can't be simplified. What about 0.36? Well, we write the number on top without a decimal point. On the bottom, we put 100 because it's tenths, hundredths. The lowest place value is in the hundredths. So 36 over 100 can be simplified. 36 is divisible by 4. 36 divided 4 is 9. 100 divided 4 is 25. So what about 1.02? Well, we're going to write the number without a decimal point on top. Once again, the lowest place value is hundredths. So write it like this. 102 divided 2 is 51. 100 divided 2 is 50. And there we are. We've converted this decimal to a fraction. All right, 0.15. So again, we write the number without a decimal point on top. And then on the bottom, the lowest place value. The 5 is in the hundredths column. That's why I put 100 on the bottom. 0.15 is 15 hundredths. So 15 is divisible by 5 because it ends in 5. 15 divided 5 is 3. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So once again, decimals and fractions are just different ways to represent the same number. Let's now look at a slightly harder question. So which is larger, 17 over 20 or 21 over 25? Now, we did questions like this before involving equivalent fractions, but we can make it easier on ourselves to convert these both to decimals. So let's first convert 17 over 20 to a decimal. Well, 20 can be multiplied by 5 to get to a power of 10. 20 times 5 is 100. What you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. 17 over 20, 17 times 5 is 85. Remember, multiplying by 5, you can multiply it by 10, 170, and then halve it. 20 times 5 is 100. So 17 over 20 is 0.85. On the other hand, 21 over 25. Well, I can times by 4 to get to 100. So if I times the bottom by 4, I times the top by 4. Timesing by 4, double 21 is 42, double it again is 84. 25 times 4 is 100. So 21 over 25 is 0.84. So clearly you can tell this one here is larger. It's so much easier to compare numbers when they're decimals rather than fractions. So what would be the number halfway between these two numbers? Well, halfway between 0.85 and 0.84 is clearly 0.845. So this gave an example where it's much easier to work with decimals than fractions. Sometimes it's easier to work with fractions than decimals, particularly when you have recurring decimals that go on forever. So very important we know how to convert between the two. All right, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.